Which Denver Broncos offensive free agents will be back in 2024? We'll take a look at who's going to be hitting the free agency market, and we'll also share our thoughts whether or not the Broncos should bring them back in the mix. You're going to get all that and much more on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
NFL free agency frenzy is the next big thing that's going to be approaching the Denver Broncos once March rolls around here. We already know they aren't going to be as active in the first wave, but what does that mean for their in-house guys? We'll break it all down on today's brand new episode of Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much, Broncos Country, for tuning in, making this show your first listen of the day every single day, and a special shout out to all the everydayers out there in Broncos Country. Just a reminder, you can get this podcast for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts all throughout the entire offseason. We have you covered with everything you need to know about your favorite team, the Denver Broncos. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter from Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Sayre, my friend, now as we start to take a little bit of a look at our offseason content, there's going to be a lot of change that we forecast here for the Broncos this offseason. We got to take a look at what's upcoming, right? Free agency will happen in March. There's still a lot of time between now and then, but it's time for us to break down and analyze, like, what is the outlook right now? What is the early preview of who's going to be hitting the free agency market for the Broncos on the offensive side of the ball? More importantly, are they going to bring certain players back? This is always an interesting conversation that we're going to build up. So let's start things off with Sir Lloyd Cushenberry.
Sir Lloyd Cushenberry III, the former third-round pick out of LSU who snapped to Joe Burrow at the college level, Cody, a player that Broncos fans were very excited to get back in the 2020 NFL draft, when I think a lot of people were really hoping for him as a second-round pick. And then to get him in round 3, I mean, just had everybody going bonkers during that 2020 NFL draft. So it's been a tough few years in Denver for Cushenberry up until 2023, where he was getting recognized by, Pro Football Focus as one of the best pass protectors at his position in the game. Really seemed to take a step forward here in 2023 for the Broncos. May have ultimately priced himself out of range. I'm interested where you come down on this, Cody, because we all heard George Payton a handful of days ago say, we view Alex Forsyth, the 2023 7th-round pick out of Oregon, we view him as a NFL starter at the center position. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean we view him as the starter over Lloyd Cushenberry, but they view him in that light. So you got an impending free agent at a key position on the offensive line. If you're switching quarterbacks in 2024, it could make sense to also switch the center position and gain those guys some chemistry. But do you think Lloyd Cushenberry is worth bringing back on a deal that's worth north of $10 million per season?
Well, that's tough, right? Because you mentioned like the early struggles. I thought you nailed it with saying that Cush this past season had his best year as a pro, right? And I think year over year, he's demonstrated growth, right? But here's where you get stuck in the dilemma, right? He's had one really good season out of the entirety in which he's been in the National Football League. Is it risky to pay him that type of money? I think that's where's the cost analysis, right? And we all know the Broncos offensive line, they were better this year, but the overall production from that unit in terms of run blocking, pass protection was far too inconsistent. And is that a scheme issue or is that a personnel issue? I think once those questions get answered internally, I'd love to be a fly on the wall in the conversations of Sean Payton and obviously George Payton and the scouting department, even Zach Strief, who's going to have input in these meetings that are going on here this week in Dove Valley as coaches are back in the building. They're talking about it. They're bringing their reports from this season. And now this is where they start to really begin their player analysis, player review, and also forecasting for the future here. It's tough, right? Like for me, it's not my money, right? And I know we always say that it's not our money, but paying him north of $10 million per season after one really good year, to me, I think is a gamble. It's a risk, right? Now, obviously, if you believe internally in that building and as a coaching staff, you believe that he is getting better each and every year, that's all that matters. And if you feel comfortable about it, yeah, you do extend him. But I did find it interesting that George Payton referenced Alex Forsyth as a starting center in the National Football League. And hey, maybe he might be getting some snaps with his former quarterback, Bo Nix, in the near future. We'll have to see about that.
You never know. Hey, that's going to be a fun discussion all offseason, especially as the NFL draft ramps up, and to see what the Broncos do with Russell Wilson, who, by the way, I feel like we need to mention, he is not a free agent, despite all the discussion about him potentially not being on the Broncos this year. So if you're needing clarity on that, Russell Wilson is not a free agent. He's still under contract with the Broncos as of the time of this recording, and we'll see what the offseason brings. We mentioned on yesterday's episode the interesting tweet posted by Russell Wilson there, talking about how 2024 could be better even than 2023, with a very I don't know if you want to say an influence on maybe coming back to Denver. We'll see what all happens there. But whoever's under center at the quarterback position, will they be throwing to Adam Troutman? Will Adam Troutman be blocking for whoever is running the football? I think, Cody, we know Sean Payton really likes Troutman, just his consistency. He's said a number of times with Troutman, you know what you're going to get. And I think there's a value to that when you can have a guy like that who raises the floor of a room. I view Adam Troutman as somebody the Broncos will try to bring back within reason. I don't think they're going to break the bank to bring him back, but I think he's going to be a player that we see in orange and blue in 2024.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. He's consistent. Like, that's the thing. And we knew it coming in. He's not going to be this legitimate pass catching threat, though he can. I think if the route designs were better for Denver's offense, I feel like he's a guy with his size. You can run a hitch at 6 to 7 yards, have him post up because he's a bigger body guy to box out smaller defenders. There you go, 5 to 6 yards. We just never saw that, right? And I think Troutman started to come on a little bit more offensively as the end of the year kind of progressed in terms of how he was being utilized by Payton. I think so much of their emphasis this year kind of got shot in the leg a little bit after they lost Greg Dulcich to his injury. They built a lot around what Greg was going to do and what he was going to be in that offense. And I felt like that maybe would have opened things up more for Troutman overall here. I think that they will bring him back more specifically over a guy like Chris Manhertz. I think Manhertz is, like I said, there were times where, obviously he's the veteran presence, not much of a pass catching guy. I think he only had 1 or 2 catches this season for Denver. So they're going to have to really figure out the tight end position. I think Troutman is reliable. As you mentioned, you know what you're getting. Sean Payton trusts him. And for Sean, that's important. So if Sean trusts him, I guarantee you he's going to be back here in 2024. Now, I think another guy that I think you have a lot of trust with, not only just on offense, but I also think his ability on special teams, Michael Burton. Do you see him coming back here for the Broncos? Part of me feels like yes, because look, even look at the play that he had with Lil Jordan Humphrey's big time touchdown that he had against the Chargers, that type of extra effort. It's hard to find guys like that. And the fullback position, as we've seen, is starting to get phased out of the National Football League. Burton is one of those guys I think will always be a consistent realm, and I think that he will be back here for Denver this upcoming season.
I think so too. He's just a valuable role player in a number of ways. Obviously, the quote unquote starting fullback, as there aren't many of those around the NFL. He's the only fullback on the roster, so by default, he's the starter. But I think really when you look at him, Cody, like you mentioned, it's the versatility, the special teams, the downfield blocks, the things that go unnoticed in the box score that ultimately add up and contribute to winning plays in games. The Broncos left him in for a number of times on pass protection. There was a lot of opportunities that he got to make an impact in this offense without getting the ball necessarily. So I do think we'll see Michael Burton back. Of course, with all of these, it's got to be with the qualifier that, hey, none of these guys can really break the bank. If they're looking to reset the market at certain positions, I don't think the Broncos are going to do that. But within the realm of reason, getting these guys as part of your 90-man roster, I think that's going to be important. And then bringing in some competition for both Troutman and Burton going forward.
It'll be very interesting. We'll also have to take a look at franchise tag candidates as well here this week on Locked On Broncos. Also, keep in mind, Nate Adkins still on the roster could also be one of those guys if the team feels like he's ready to take the next step. We'll see. He got in against the Raiders and then he got hurt, unfortunately. So there are just questions aplenty here about Denver's offense. We'll also take a look at maybe some of the key role players, guys who weren't starters for the Broncos on the offensive side of the ball in 2023. Could they be back? We'll take a look at that here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's Locked On Broncos podcast is brought to you by our friends over there at LinkedIn Jobs. And at the start of the new year, every small business owner is asking themselves the same question. What's the one move I can make that'll take my business to the next level here in 2024? LinkedIn Jobs knows that your success all depends on the team that you surround yourself with. That's why LinkedIn Jobs has created the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses, they get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So make sure you achieve the goals that you have for your business here in 2024 with the right team member. It's why small businesses rank LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn also knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or the resources to hire. Thankfully, with LinkedIn, the process is intuitive, it's quick, and it's easy. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
A couple of key role players for the Denver Broncos offensively are on expiring contracts here in 2024, and the team needs to decide, are they going to move forward without them, or are they going to try to bring some of them back, including a newcomer to the team in 2023 who made obviously a significant impact. We're going to talk all about those players here as we continue this episode of Locked On Broncos. We want to say thank you and give a shout out to every single one of you that makes Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day, every single day, wherever and however you listen to podcasts, or if you watch the show on YouTube. We appreciate every single one of you for being part of the discussion and being part of the show with us every single day. And Cody, I mean, the offensive free agent discussion continues here. I think let's bring up an underrated name, right? Obviously, the Broncos don't have many restricted free agents this year. That's kind of rare. We typically see them have at least 4, 5, maybe 6 restricted free agents or exclusive rights free agents. Don't have many of those this year. Only one restricted free agent on the offensive side of the ball, and that's offensive lineman Quinn Bailey, who was the report as eligible guy all throughout the season for Denver, the sixth man on the offensive line, if you will. Quinn Bailey, restricted free agent. Are you offering him a tender there? Are you going to try to bring him back on your own terms? What do you think the Broncos will do here with old Quinn Bailey, who's been with the team now for a variety of years?
Yeah, that was my favorite soundbite all year, is hearing the refs say number 75 has reported as eligible. We got to hear that every single week here. I think for Quinn, like, this is a guy, as you mentioned, has been on the roster for several years, has been a developmental guy. And I think going back to what George Payton's point was about developing players, look, sometimes you find a guy and you feel like, hey, like, we can use this guy. And I think Quinn has emerged. Not only can he play tackle for you, but he can play guard, right? And in today's NFL, you need to be able to have guys who can play multiple positions. And as we've seen, like, we didn't see it, fortunately this year, knock on wood, for Denver, they were able to stay healthy on the offensive line for a majority of the season, minus the last week where they obviously were missing Mike McGlinchey at right tackle. For me, I think it would be easy to bring a guy like Quinn back. It's clear as day that the team, and obviously the offensive line coach, Zach Strief, has very high regard on him. And especially with Denver being open, saying, hey, we're not going to be very active in the first wave of free agency. We're not going to be able to. So at this point, it kind of tells me, I think Quinn Bailey, he's going to be back. Team control is always usually a good thing to have in a situation like this. We know that there's mutual interest from Quinn, and there's also mutual interest from the Broncos side of things. I think Quinn Bailey is going to be back. But there's also a guy, too, that, at one point on the show, we were questioning, why is he on the roster? He's actually proven to be a reliable option here for Denver, and that's Cam Fleming, who obviously made his return during training camp last year. He went through the entire offseason process figuring out if he's going to be on a team. I think the bigger question here is, now will he be back with the team here in 2024, considering that they are very, very high on Alex Palczewski, who obviously had a very impressive preseason for the Broncos?
Yes, I think it is going to be Alex Palczewski's season going forward for the Denver Broncos, and Cam Fleming gave the Broncos way more than I think anybody anticipated. Remember back when they originally signed him, it was after the whole Jawan James fiasco, and they brought in him and Bobby Massey and I think a number of other guys, and they ended up signing both Cam Fleming and Bobby Massey. And Cam Fleming has somehow stuck around, multiple different coaching, 3 different coaching staffs, obviously very impressive there. And certainly, I think he's proven his value. Some other team will likely get a veteran offensive lineman who can provide some quality depth, both tackle positions. He played left tackle for Garrett Bowles last year. We've seen him play right tackle. He's played guard in his career. He can do it all. So I think he's going to get valued by somebody else, Cody, but I do believe it's Alex Palczewski's season for the Broncos in the swing tackle department. Now, we didn't talk about this guy with the starters, but ultimately you can split hairs over that however you want to. Maybe the most notable free agent that we're going to talk about outside of Lloyd Cushenberry is kicker Will Lutz. The Broncos traded for this guy last offseason. Now, he is coming up on expiring deal, and Sean Payton has a lot of familiarity with him. You don't want to overpay kickers, Cody. I feel like that's a death sentence in the NFL today. Other than Justin Tucker, right? I mean, it's like you pay a kicker a bunch of money, you're asking for problems these days. And I don't know how that goes, but you also don't want to mess around with this position, as we've seen. So are you giving Will Lutz the bag? Are you hoping that he takes a little Sean Payton discount? What do you think the Broncos are going to do here? Do you think he's coming back in 2024?
I think he'll be back. I don't think that he's going to be in a place to command a massive bag, from Denver. And look, you have to be very particular about your situation from the kicking game. I think Will obviously had his, that first week against the Raiders, the missed field goal, the missed extra point. He had a couple of misses on the season, but he also had a couple of big moments that if it weren't for him, the Broncos wouldn't have been in the conversation. They would have been eliminated from the playoffs a lot faster if it weren't for, as Broncos fans have called him, Big Deal Will. I can't say the other one that rhymes with Lutz, but Big Something Lutz as well. It's hard, Sayre. It's hard to find like a consistent kicker. And look, I know that there were a lot of Broncos fans after that week one game. They're like, oh, look at Brandon McManus, what he's doing in Jacksonville. I remember this season, there was a streak where Brandon McManus, I think, missed 5 of 7 kicks, I think in the final half of the season there, or like in 1 month for the Jaguars. Like, kicking has been so volatile, not just for some of these guys, but I think all across the NFL, we've seen misses on extra points. We've seen doinks just left and right all throughout the season. I'm very curious to see what the overall stat on missed field goals and missed extra points were from the season. I think Will Lutz, for the most part, he's a guaranteed guy that's going to help you, and he's going to be, I think from that 44 to 47-yard range is going to be good. I think he can nail a couple of 50-yarders, but I think you're going to get consistency from 20, 30, and 40 to 49 yards, which is what you really need in today's NFL. And Denver's offense ultimately has to be better, and I think he will be back here in 2024. Also, a little bit of a note, he was renting Brandon McManus's house the entire season. So kind of trading places there here in the Broncos from the kicking department.
Yeah, what you're saying is he needs to move out right away. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just messing. We love Brandon McManus here. McManus was great in the 2015 Super Bowl season. And you're right, he did have a tough stretch down the end of that season. I mean, close losses for Jacksonville against Houston, and I think there was one other game that they lost in overtime based on a missed field goal in regulation. So it is tough, and it is volatile. It's like if you watch baseball like me, it's a relief pitchers, very volatile. One year the guy could be a dominant closer. The next year it's like, why is this guy pitching at AAA? Wasn't he just the closer for the Dodgers last year? I mean, it's like that with kicking in the NFL. I mean, you're wondering why Brett Maher makes 91% of his kicks and 9 of 11 from 50 plus last year. And this year it's looking like, when he kicks an extra point for the Rams in that game, Cody, the playoff game, it looks like me trying to draw a straight line. It's like, why is it squiggling like this? Why can't I draw a straight line? Like, it's just weird how things work out that way. So with the volatility of kicking, to have a veteran like Lutz, I think is important for the Broncos. And it's got to be Big Strut Lutz, right? That's what you were talking about earlier. That's the nickname you were talking about. It's got to be it.
Maybe we'll talk about the wheelbarrow theory here in a little bit here, but Broncos country on the offensive side of the ball. What are some needs that you feel like Denver should absolutely address here in free agency? We're going to continue our conversation here on today's brand new episode of Locked On Broncos. Today's Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel Sportsbook. The NFL regular season has wrapped up and the playoffs are in full swing. We just wrapped up NFL wildcard week and the divisional round is approaching, and there is still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. So when you sign up as a brand new customer and place a $5 bet on anything on FanDuel Sportsbook, you're going to get $150 back in bonus bets, whether your bet wins or whether it loses. Their app is super easy to use, and there are so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays. You can get in on the action as the games are ongoing this weekend for the divisional round, and you can choose anytime touchdown scorers. You can choose how the drive is going to end. You can get in on all the action on FanDuel. You can find bets in the new Explore tab, and you can make a parlay in the Parlay Hub. It's the best way to find popular parlays. I should have parlayed this weekend for going perfect on my picks. We'll see how things go there. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel is the official partner of the NFL. Today's episode is also brought to you by our friends over there at Jase Medical. And look, I know we come to sports to escape from some of the crazy realities of life, but can we talk just for a minute about preparing for a life? In a real life, sometimes the unexpected can happen. And when those moments happen, you want to be prepared. That's where Jase Medical comes in. The Jase case, it's a pack of 5 different antibiotics that can be used to treat a long list of different things, stuff that can happen to any of us. So make sure you check it out and get yourself a Jase case by visiting jasemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. So get your hands on some potential life-saving antibiotics. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to jasemedical.com and use the offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. As we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, we'll take a look at what are some of the offensive needs the Broncos might need to address in free agency and how might they be able to do it. There's so much contingent upon what happens with Russell Wilson's contract and how the team chooses to navigate this offseason. We'll break it all down here on today's episode of the show. Real quick, just wanted to say thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country for tuning in and making us your first listen. We appreciate you so much for making the show exactly what it is. Now, we know that the offseason is here for the Broncos, but we'll still have a show for you every single day all year long, because for the true fan, there is never an offseason, and it's never been more important than right now to stay plugged in with the Denver Broncos. As frustrating as the end of the season was for this team, there's a lot of things that are exciting about where this team can go. We'll have you covered every step of the way. Sayre, let's open it up here. Take a look at some offensive areas to address here in free agency as it approaches here in March. I opened up with it. I think so much of Denver's approach is going to be contingent upon what happens with Russell Wilson's contract. As you mentioned, he's not a free agent, but if Denver chooses to move on, there are some implications there from a financial and salary cap standpoint that do impact Denver's ability to be able to maybe address some areas that they absolutely need to. And obviously quarterback will be one of them here. So in your opinion, if you had to start somewhere, where are you starting here with some of the Broncos' top needs in NFL free agency as it approaches here in the month of March?
I think one of the deepest position groups to look at right now is the tight end position. Of course, we talked about the Broncos' own free agent there, Adam Troutman, but there's a number of other guys throughout the rest of the league that I think could be very interesting, notably players like Hunter Henry, who would obviously help add what the Broncos really lack at that position, a true pass catching threat. You could take a risk on somebody like, if you want to stay in New England, Mike Gesicki, a guy who was a former second-round pick, played for the Dolphins, has shown his pass catching chops throughout the course of his career at different times, and just unfortunately hasn't been able to stay consistent. I mean, there's players like that. Dalton Schultz of the Texans. I'm sure he's going back to Houston, Cody, but he is a free agent as well, and he'll help determine what the market looks like, because I think he had a really good year for Houston as well. So there's just a number of names. You could go all throughout the rest of the league and look. I mean, tight ends were a popular position group to franchise tag the last couple of years because the price tag to do that is not prohibitive for teams. So the Broncos could take advantage of a team-friendly market there. I know you mentioned the Russell Wilson situation. Going to be fascinating to see. I know that I don't think any tight end would be considered a wave one guy. Certainly nobody that's not getting franchise tagged, right? So I think that's a position that you could look at to raise the floor, even on top of Adam Troutman. Get a pass-catching threat and give some competition to Greg Dulcich.
I think it's going to be interesting to see maybe how that kind of plays out here. And I think another thing, as you mentioned, pertaining to the Russell Wilson situation here, obviously we know that Jarrett Stidham was signed during the first wave of NFL free agency last year to be the backup to Russ here, could be in line for the potential starting role potentially. Could Denver maybe look? I've seen it floated out by some national talking heads that Denver could look to get a bridge quarterback. I've seen Mason Rudolph's name thrown out there for some odd reason, which I'm like, really? Like, that's going to move the needle here for the Denver Broncos in 2024? Like, Mason Rudolph, like, look, what he was able to do in a few games for Pittsburgh is great, but here's the reality. That's not sustainable. That was almost like getting caught up in the whole Mitchell Trubisky preseason hype one year, and then he goes out and he gets signed in free agency and then doesn't do really anything in that role when he got a chance to be a starter once again in the National Football League. So for me, does Denver look at quarterback if they do move on from Russell Wilson? For me, Sayre, I'm on the precipice. And I want to say I feel like they need to look for a quarterback in the draft versus free agency, right? I know there's going to be guys like that are going to be available. That could be some good stopgaps here, but Denver doesn't need that. And I think over the weekend, watching the wild card playoffs, It's like, all right, you don't necessarily need a stopgap. Like, it was exciting with Joe Flacco for a little bit there in Cleveland, but we all saw reality. Everything kind of came back down to earth for him. The key at this point for Denver, and I've seen people say this, well, Denver's never drafted and developed a quarterback. I understand that in the past. This is a different regime here with George Payton, with Sean Payton. Now, while there isn't much evidence to suggest that Sean Payton can develop a quarterback into something, I think that Denver has to go with the route of getting a young guy, saying, hey, we have our eyes on this guy for the future of the organization. And whether he plays as a rookie or whether he waits a year or two, I think is all contingent upon that. But I think that's the route Denver should go here when we talk about maybe addressing quarterback this offseason.
I have to touch on the argument that you just made from the fans' perspective, Cody, about never having developed quarterback. I guess the Lions should quit the playoffs right now. They've never won the Super Bowl, so why would you even try to do it, right? The Texans, they've never won it, so just quit now because you've never proven that you can do it, so you might as well not even try. It's never. I hate that logic. It's one of the dumbest things I see. That's an instant ignore for me on Twitter, Cody, when people talk like that. It used to be, well, you can't draft Texas Tech quarterbacks. That's why Patrick Mahomes isn't going to work out in the NFL. Yeah, how's that one going for everybody? So I just think it's a funny argument, but I agree with you. I think you need to draft a quarterback. Ultimately, the Broncos quarterback budget is very interesting in 2024, isn't it? You've got 39 committed to Russell Wilson. Jarrett Stidham is going to count $7 million against the salary cap, and then a rookie, if people get their wish, which would be a first-round pick, will also account for quite a bit of cash and cap against your 2024 salary cap. So we're talking about investing upwards of, I don't know, 50, 55 million at the position this year. And if you go out and get a veteran bridge, you kind of have to hope that Russ signs somewhere else and gives you enough offset to be able to factor that guy into the budget. So it's not a clear black and white answer of, hey, go get a bridge quarterback. It's like, who's going to be willing to sign for basically the veteran minimum that can actually help your team win or even compete with Jarrett Stidham? And that's kind of where we circle back to, well, why don't you just keep Russell Wilson for another year and see what happens, right? Because it might be better than the alternative. Even if you do want to draft somebody, imagine, Cody, imagine cutting Russell Wilson this spring and just saying, you know what? Let's just be done with it. Let's get rid of the contract. Let's wash our hands of 2025, all those sorts of things. You go into March and free agency and you have Jarrett Stidham as QB1, Ben DiNucci as QB2. And then you get through free agency and you're like, nobody's willing to sign for the minimum to play here. Okay, we're going forward with Jarrett Stidham. You get to the draft. You don't get the guy that you want at pick number 12, or you're not able to trade up to get the guy that you want. All of a sudden you're caught with your pants down at the quarterback position, and you could have just kept Russell Wilson because you're paying him $39 million already. So I think that logic kind of leads me to, hey, cool heads prevail, right? This is why the team takes time off after the season to evaluate things and let cool heads prevail, because a week ago, 2 weeks ago, I'm sitting here saying absolutely not. He's gone. Like, don't do the 2025 $37 million. But now I'm sitting here like, okay, if I actually sit here and think about it, maybe consider bringing him back.
That might be the best bet for the Broncos at this point if they want to avoid the financial hell. Maybe there is an understanding like, hey, Russ, look, I know we signed you to this contract, but let's try to mitigate this issue. You do it. Hey, look, we get you at least 2 more years here, and then it's easier for both sides if you want to go elsewhere. If you still believe you can play, which that's a hard conversation to have, right? Because Russ knows and wants to play longer than just, 2 or 3 years at this point. He obviously wants to stay in Denver. I know he's been very vocal about that. He said that to the media. He said that to players inside that locker room. Like, he would love to stay in Denver. But I think so much is contingent upon this whole situation with the whole contract and how that was approached. Like, does Sean Payton truly believe he can't get anything out of Russ? If that's the case, then obviously I think, yeah, you're probably going to see them part ways. But if this was all just over the contract and making sure like, hey, we're out of the playoffs now, we don't have a spark, we don't want you to risk getting hurt to where all of a sudden it puts us in a situation where our hands are tied behind our back. I understand both sides of that. So it makes things very, very interesting here going forward here. But Broncos Country, that'll wrap up today's episode of the show here on the Locked On Broncos podcast. Tomorrow's episode, for all you everydayers out there, we're going to dive deep into some of the Broncos defensive free agents, which starters are going to be free agents, which role players are going to be free agents, what can Denver do, and what are some areas they need to address. You'll get all that on tomorrow's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.